This content is brought to you by Uphold, which is a great platform that makes it easy and simple for you to buy, hold, and sell and earn crypto. You can trade from anything to anything. For example, you could trade between cryptocurrencies and precious metals. It's an amazing platform that I've been using for years. And in fact, I still use to this day because they're one, a great exchange. They're reputable, and they're one of the only exchanges that still lists XRP. Many of the other exchanges have delisted XRP due to the SEC lawsuit, but you can still get XRP on Uphold. So I've interviewed the CEO, the founder, and many other representatives from Uphold over the years, and I'm a fan of this platform. And once again, there's some great features like trading between different assets very easily. You don't have to convert to a currency and so forth. They're used by 10 plus million users. They have over 200 cryptocurrencies. And they have a very easy to use app. The interface is really nice. So I can certainly vouch for this platform. Once again, I've been a user for years. So if you'd like to learn more about Uphold, please visit the link in the description. Welcome back to the Thinking Crypto podcast, your home for cryptocurrency news and interviews. With me today is Attorney John Deaton, who's no stranger to the show. We're going to talk all things SEC, Ripple, and even some Grayscale. John, great to have you back on the show.
Tony, as always, thank you for having me, brother. I appreciate it.
John, things have escalated, if that's the right word. There are loads of amicus briefs coming in the Ripple lawsuit. Let's start with that. We got your amicus brief. We have one from Coinbase, the Blockchain Association, the Digital Chamber of Commerce. What's your take on all this?
Well, my take is you're right. Escalate is a great word. And I think we're at 11 or even 12. And in fact, today, the SEC sent a letter to the judge asking for the extensions to be moved from the 15th until the end of the month, 2-week basically extension, so that and an extra 10 pages in their reply brief so that they can address all of these amicus briefs. And Ripple's not objecting to that. So everything's going to get pushed 2 weeks. It's not the end of the world, so people shouldn't get upset. And they'll be able to address this. And so she also, not she, but the SEC also asked the judge, and Ripple agreed, that any other amicus must be filed by November 11th, right? So if there's anybody else out there that plans on filing an amicus brief, you're probably going to have, she's going to be a deadline, right? She's going to cut it off around the November 11th. So listen, I think it's great, right? Yeah. A lot of people, and I love these people, a lot of people in the XRP community have said things like, Deaton told you guys, 2 years ago that this was against the entire crypto market. And I love those people. They're great to me, and they've been so supportive of me. And I say to them, welcome. We want a united front against the SEC because the SEC has declared war on crypto. I think basically, Tony, what happened is what you and I did an interview, you interviewed me a year and a half ago, and we discussed this, and you were on board. You were one of the other vocal people in the community who said this. You said this lawsuit, because the way the SEC has alleged it, because they went after the token itself, if Ripple is deemed a security, then all altcoins. And we even said ETH. You own ETH, I own ETH. And we said, look, this also implicates Ethereum. Right. And a lot of people ignored that, Tony, because they let the noise, I call it the noise of the complaint, where they said things like the Ripple founders try to enrich themselves. Brad Garlinghouse said he was long XRP while he was dumping XRP. Like, they use that kind of language, even though they didn't plead fraud, to kind of stir up people and right. Divide and conquer, right? And you and I and others were like, we're not going to fall for that. And this is about crypto. And I think the pivotal point for the community is, in fact, when Gary Gensler would not say Ethereum is not a security. Let's just all be honest about it, right? That's how I look at it. And when he said proof of stake, the merge, implicated the securities laws in the United States, and he was only comfortable saying Bitcoin's a commodity, that's when everybody said, okay, this really is a war on all of crypto, and therefore we have to fight it. And it doesn't matter if somebody is 6 months late to the fight to me, or if they're a year late, or they're 2 years late. Come on in. Let's join together. Let's end the tribalism, and let's fight the SEC and fight this government overreach. And so I'm glad the Digital Chamber of Commerce filed. I'm glad the blockchain filed, and they may all make points that are important, right? And I'll tell you another thing. I was very, very relieved that they were, because I had 30 pages, right, in my brief. I can't say everything I want to say.
Sure.
And so because other people were able to make points, I could focus the XRP holder brief on what was important for us. And so by them doing that, that also alleviated some of the burden on me. And I appreciate you saying my brief, but it's your brief too. Okay. Right. Because people who haven't read it need to know that an important point of the XRP holder Amicus brief is the Thinking Crypto YouTube channel interview of Commissioner Hester Peirce. Because I point out that Hester Peirce said on your show that at the SEC, they tend to think of the token itself as the security, and they ignore the offering, the circumstances surrounding the offering of the asset. And they do what she called a shorthand, right? A shorthand, and just look at the token. Well, in the brief, I cite your interview of her, and I say that's called an unconstitutional shortcut. You're not allowed to just say the token itself and ignore 76 years of case law. So, right. So it's your brief, it's my brief. It's I cited materials that people in the XRP community, the sleuths, had uncovered. You know, the video of Gensler saying even Ripple deserves clarity. Right, that's in there because I'm pointing out what this case really is a test case to try to regulate the secondary market, and that's really what's at stake here. So it's our brief anyway.
So John, as always, thank you for the work you're doing on behalf of all the XRP holders, and as a result, also the rest of the crypto market, because what the SEC is doing in saying that all these tokens are securities, even the secondary market, that let's say Ripple loses, right? That would apply to Cardano and Algorand and Solana and all these other tokens. And I hold those other tokens as well as millions of other people. So there's a lot of implications here.
No, you're right, because people need to understand this is what the SEC says. They say that because Ripple sold XRP for investment to some people, and because Ripple made statements or undertook efforts to develop a use case for XRP, that therefore that alone, that they sold it for an investment and that they undertook some efforts, that meets the Howey test. And that doesn't. They even say to the judge that it meets the second and third prong of the Howey test as a matter of law without even doing an analysis. And so that means if that were to win, Tony, you're right, because then all you'd have to say is, okay, has Charles Hoskinson done anything positive for Cardano? Has he said any statements about Cardano that are positive? Has he undertaken any efforts? And then if there's any kind of sell of Cardano, then all of a sudden they could argue the same thing. And people got to understand that when the secondary market, we don't know who we're buying it from. It's just an exchange, right? And so how are you in a common enterprise with Ripple if you never heard of Ripple, you don't know anything about Ripple, you don't know anything about Brad Garlinghouse? And so, yes, you could take the Ethereum Foundation sold Ether. We all know that. They sold Ether at the height. Vitalik has stated that. Well, did the Ethereum Foundation undertake efforts to promote Ether? Yes. So the same test would apply. Ethereum is a security under that same test. Consensus supports Ether and promoted it and sold it. It would meet the same test. And so you're 100% right that what we're fighting, and I think that why you see so many entities coming on board, is that they realize that this is a fight for all of crypto, not just XRP.
Yeah, absolutely. So, John, I want to talk about the Coinbase amicus brief specifically, because there's a lot to this, the backstory here, because Coinbase, and we talked about it in interviews in the past, their securities lawyers spoke to the SEC. The SEC said nothing. There was a lot of conversations back in 2017, 2018. Will Coinbase list XRP? Is there a security issue? They went ahead and listed. And obviously they delisted when the lawsuit came about. And now they're fighting on behalf of Ripple. What are your thoughts? It's an interesting dynamic given the history.
Well, it is. And, here's the thing, what your people know that may not be on top of this. In 2019, in January of 2019, and this is in our brief, Coinbase went to the SEC. They went to Hinman. They went to Valerie, right? They went to that part of the SEC, and they said, listen, we have evaluated in our system, the same system that you all complemented. XRP today is not a security, and we're going to list it next month. Yeah. Unless you say otherwise, because we're going to ask to do an IPO real soon. So we don't want to run afoul of the U.S. securities laws or what the SEC thinks. Unless you say something, we're going forward with XRP because it's not a security. And I can't tell you what the SEC said. I can tell you what they didn't say with 100% certainty. They did not say XRP is a security.
Right.
Because Coinbase listed it on February 26, 2019. And Tony, what I bring out to the judge in our brief, not only did Coinbase list XRP, they promoted the shit out of XRP.
Yep.
Excuse the French, but they were like, USDC and XRP move money internationally for free in seconds. We're expanding Coinbase's business and cross-border payments utilizing XRP and USDC. That was Coinbase's promotion. And so I point out to the judge that XRP holders relied on Coinbase more than they relied on Ripple. You see that, you're like, hey, that's a big deal. Let me buy some XRP. Right. Exactly. And so what's interesting about your question is that the SEC didn't get into that. Right. They didn't. And I think they viewed it as Ripple brought it up. Deaton's definitely bringing it up in his brief. Right. So there's no point in taking shots at the SEC. Remember, and when they delisted XRP, they filed for an IPO 6 or 7 days later. And so they delisted it because they wanted to get their IPO approved, right? So how do you get your IPO approved if you have an unregistered security you're selling because they filed a lawsuit? A lot of people forget that point. And so I think the SEC, Coinbase lawyers, I think they were smart and not getting into that because it's unnecessary to point out that, hey, we met with you. But what they did do is say, look, there's no fair notice in the world that even the Hinman speech, which was meant to give clarity, created more confusion. And it's unfair. It's unfair to let XRP be traded for 7.5 years publicly and then all of a sudden call it a security retroactively. And also, listen, I don't know this for sure, but you're aware, because I've said it on your show, I've predicted that Gensler is going to file against an exchange. I've predicted that. I stand by that prediction. I still think it's coming. And it could be against Coinbase. So Coinbase could be laying the groundwork for their own defense, right?
Well, they've already blocked Coinbase lending. You remember Brian Armstrong, the CEO, tweeted out the SEC has been acting shady. They tried to work with them, but they're not getting through. It's just not working. And then they filed a lawsuit against some folks who did some insider trading, but trying to implicate certain coins without going through the due process.
Right. This SEC basically has filed a case against individuals. And I'm not commenting about if they did insider trading, prosecute them, right? And if they're guilty, they should be held responsible. But what the SEC is doing is they're saying that these 9 tokens, which are ERC20 tokens, are securities, and they always have been, but they didn't sue Coinbase, who can defend it much better than 2 individuals, right? Because the SEC doesn't have to prove that. They can prove wire charge, right? A wire fraud, without proving the underlying asset is a security. But this is a way, in my opinion, that the SEC is trying to get some kind of court ruling that says these tokens are securities, even if they're not binding precedent, that just some judge says yes, or these guys agree and they settle and they agree that they sold unregistered securities.
They already did it. They did it as well with the Kim Kardashian suit, where they mentioned Ethereum Max as a security, but once again, they didn't go through the formal process of saying, is this actual security, and filing it against the founders of the Ethereum Max.
Sure. And people, listen, I would encourage people, honestly, if you have time, to read the XRP holder brief that I filed, because like I point out that even if you look at the 2019 framework that they listed, that's Bill Hinman and Valerie's name is on, that framework, when you go through an analysis of what a digital asset, whether it meets the Howey test, Tony, one of the things that they say is that a cryptocurrency, a digital asset that can be utilized instantaneously in payments, with payments, the very thing XRP does, and can be used as a substitute for fiat immediately, that kind of cryptocurrency unlikely meets the Howey test. They said that in 2019, which makes it sound like XRP is not a security. And so there's all that evidence, and I'm very confident that the SEC is going to lose. I can't say that that the judge will adopt Ripple's arguments wholeheartedly and all of that, but I'm very confident in saying that I don't see the judge granting summary judgment in favor of the SEC. You know what I mean? And the XRP community should be very proud of that, because they had a big part of that success that I believe is eventual success.
For sure. Now, John, I recently interviewed former SEC branch chief Elisa Braganza, published an interview yesterday, I believe it was, and I'm seeing a lot of former SEC officials also scratching their heads as to what is the SEC doing here. This is a mess. You have ethics violations with Bill Hinman and Ethereum. And the word that keeps coming back up is mess. It's a mess.
Yeah. Well, again, like I said, you're doing great work, Tony, by getting people out there. And I will tell you something. If you're a former or even a current SEC person and you believe in the SEC as an institution, then you will call this a mess. You will scratch your head and say, this isn't right, and we need better answers. And I believe that's what your interviewer said. What she said was, we need better answers to these questions, because the SEC has lost all credibility. And, you have people out there calling it, and I'm not going to get into names, but you have people out there tagging me, saying I'm supporting wild conspiracy theories. It is a conclusive fact that Bill Hinman violated the financial criminal conflict statute, right? He was told that you cannot meet with your firm, Simpson Thacher, And he met 3 more times after that. They said, you can't meet them. It violates the bar. So if their own ethics office of the SEC says, if you meet them, you're in violation of the statute, and he then meets them 3 more times, he's in violation of the statute. There's no conspiracy to that. That's a fact. It's an indisputable, I'm not even gonna call it a fact, it's an indisputable truth. And no one can refute that. And the people we need to clean house. That's all. It doesn't mean that Ethereum should be pursued. It doesn't mean that Ethereum founders should be pursued or anything like that. It just means that Bill Hinman shouldn't have given that speech. And that's all it means. And we need answers to that. And you have people like the SEC enforcement director testifying before Congress, misleading Congress by saying, when Warren Davidson, the congressman, said, was the speech screened and approved by the SEC ethics office? He said, well, I can't talk about that because it's under litigation. The ethics issue is not under litigation. Right. Second of all, that question must be answered now, Tony, because the emails have been turned over. Right. So there is no more litigation. Was the speech screened and approved by SEC ethics? If it was not, can we get an investigation? If it was, then somebody needs to lose their job because they're the worst screener in the history of screens.
Yeah. So John, on that note, with the judge ordering the documents to be turned over, what does that mean now? Will we ever see will those documents ever see the light of day, or is it going to be under wraps?
Great question. The answer is, if this case does not settle before the middle of January, then we could see all of the documents, except for they would be redacted. Sure. Of course, right? There would be certain redactions because right now, all of the evidence has been sealed and it's not going to be unsealed. So Ripple, in their opposition brief to the SEC, they bring up the emails. They cite the emails in the brief. They cite who ends up being someone that you should maybe try to reach out to. Brett Redfern was his name. He was director of trading and markets at the time. Well, Ripple cites an email response in those Hinman emails about the draft speech. He says something like, if you give this speech, it's going to cause, and then it's redacted. Well, it seems like confusion, mass confusion. It's caused something, right? I don't know. It's going to hysteria, anger. I mean, there's some kind of word that's being redacted. So that's the kind of evidence. We should be able to hopefully see that. If the case settles, then everything's sealed. Case is over. No reason to, right? But if it doesn't, then it's going to be. And the good news is this Judge Torres, has already said twice that the only thing that should be redacted is biographical information. Sure. So a person's name, a person's date, bank account information, money, that kind of stuff. Of course. If Brad Garlinghouse is asked a question at his deposition and it has something to do personal, like, we don't need to know that. Right. We don't need to know where his bank is, for example, right? Yep. That kind of stuff. But the substance of it, the American people and the international people deserve to know what's being said. So I'm optimistic. At some point, it's all going to come out. The question is it January, or is it a year or two from January?
And I'm very curious how that's going to play out, because to your point, the SEC, the loss of trust it's at an all-time level. The public does not trust the SEC, not just with crypto, but with stocks as well. You have Republicans looking to take back, obviously, the House, and folks like Congressman Emmer, Huizenga, and so forth have their targets on Gary Gensler. So things are gonna. It looks like it's gonna get very rough in the next 6 months or so.
Yeah, I would say that Gary Gensler and others are probably very anxious about this midterm election. These midterm elections are very pivotal, and it's pivotal for this issue as well, because what you're getting at is that if the Republicans take control of the House, then it will be Congressman Patrick McHenry will be the chairman of the Financial Services Committee, which oversees the SEC. Right now, it's Maxine Waters.
Right.
And they've been critical of her because she hasn't demanded Gary Gensler show up. He sends other people. Well, they're promising that Gary's going to have to show up. He's going to have to ask questions, and they're going to launch investigations. And whoever controls, what people don't understand about Congress, whatever party controls, they control every single subcommittee. So Maxine Waters, who's a Democrat and part of the Biden administration, really, right, she dictates what hearings that you can have or not have related to the SEC. So if the Republicans win, Patrick McHenry will be in charge of what type of hearings there are. And he could have a hearing a month on it if he wanted. And same thing with the Senate. If the Senate flips to Republican, then you would have, I know Senator Toomey's leaving. I forget who the Republican chairperson would be on the Senate side of the banking committee, but that person would be in charge. And then they have to answer. And they've promised, at least the House has, Tom Emmer, Warren Davidson, Patrick McHenry, Huizenga, Darren Soto, I think, is in there too. I think they've all said, listen, a new day's coming. I know Tom Emmer has. New day's coming. You're going to have to answer to us. And so I'm hopeful that the conflicts issue will be one of those hearings, I've volunteered to testify. Certainly, I was hoping Gary would be sitting next to me.
Well, John, if that happens, I will be tuning in. A lot of people will be tuning in.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to ask you about, because it's also pretty significant, and that is Grayscale suing the SEC over a Bitcoin spot ETF denial. Former SEC Commissioner Joseph Grunfeld said all these applicants that got denied can sue the SEC. I've been trying to ask different folks. I spoke to Anthony Scaramucci. I was asking if Skybridge would sue as well. He said not right now, or they're not really thinking about it. But what are your thoughts on what Grayscale is doing?
Well, listen, people got to know something about Joseph Grunfeld. First of all, Joseph Grunfeld is one of the most respected former commissioners in the history of the SEC. He is a lifelong Democrat. A lot of people don't know that about him. He's a lifelong Democrat who was appointed by Ronald Reagan to be able to work with the other side, right? And so when he says that there is a real viable case against the SEC, that's not John Deaton saying it, who just became, a quasi securities lawyer 2 years ago, right? This is like a guy who teaches at Stanford Law, securities law. He's forgotten more about securities laws than I'll ever know. And so when he says that the SEC's actions are arbitrary and capricious, that's the terminology. And there is no valid justification to treat the derivatives market and the futures spot ETF with the derivatives future ETF, Bitcoin ETF, with a spot ETF. And so now today you have a short Bitcoin ETF in the United States, right? We can short Bitcoin. Yeah. And you have a futures ETF, which only really professional traders do, right? Like the individual guy like you and me, I don't know about you, Tony, but I've never really dealt with futures and derivatives. It's just, right? It's just not me. And so it allows the professional traders to have access to Bitcoin, but it doesn't allow the individual investor. And that's the real heart of it. And you're allowed to short Bitcoin. So if you're allowed to short Bitcoin, if you're allowed to trade the future price of Bitcoin, why can't you trade Bitcoin? Like, it makes no sense.
Yep.
And so I think that Professor Grunfest is 100% accurate, that this is a very strong case. And I think that they're going to win. I think that SEC is completely acting arbitrary and capricious, and they're not going to be able to justify that. And I commend Coinbase for joining in an amicus brief.
Yeah.
I commend Grayscale. Whatever you think of Grayscale and the digital people, I know they're a hot topic, sure, but you have to support what they're doing. We have to fight. You know, Grayscale is trying to turn their trust into a traditional ETF, which would be beneficial to individual holders. And so why would you prevent that? And that's the problem we have. We have an SEC. I can't say that they've forgotten the individual investor, because I don't know if they ever thought of us. You know, but Gary Gensler just wants to reward the banks and the hedge funds and all of those people. And it's just not fair. And I think that a court will acknowledge that. And I think that it's a successful thing. And so I wish that, you know, if I was sitting and I had met Anthony Scaramucci's right-hand guy, and we were talking together, and he was like, don't bring up the Ripple case. You know, they don't want to ruffle feathers with the SEC. And I get it. I mean, yeah. I get it, you know, but when the government official, people have got to realize, Tony, Gary Gensler is a political appointee.
Yeah.
He's not elected, right? He's a political appointee. Jay Clayton was a political appointee. Bill Hinman was an appointee. I mean, Bill Hinman got hired by Jay Clayton. Jay Clayton got appointed by the president to be chairman. And you're giving these individual unelected people so much power that there has to be a way for them to answer to us, the American people. I mean, think about the stories that are being reported right now. Gary Gensler, when he was at the CFTC, he got in hot water because he was using his personal email to conduct CFTC business. His response, Tony, was that he didn't know how to access his work email from home. He's the youngest partner in history of Goldman Sachs. He was a child prodigy because he's so smart. And he can't access his work email from home. That's his excuse. Well, Charlie Gasparino and Eleanor Terrett have just been publishing and reporting that, again, at the SEC, they're using text messages, Signal, other kinds of apps. Avoid the emails because of FOIA requests. See what we've done, you know, Empower Oversight got those Hinman emails that prove that he violated the law, the conflicts. Well, they don't want any of that. Listen, if you get paid by the American taxpayer, and you're doing business, use your government email. There should be nothing wrong. Tony should be able to read an email between the chairman of the SEC and the chairman of the CFTC. Like, you should be able to know, what are they saying?
Absolutely.
You know, like, there should be nothing hid about that. And so it's disgusting. And what we've got to do is remind these people that you work for the taxpayers, you work for the individual investors. We pay your salary. If you don't want to be scrutinized, then don't take the job.
Don't take the job. Yeah.
If you think you have the right to use your personal cell phone to do business, then don't take the job.
Right.
Right. And there's just, we've gotten to the point where they're doing it so blatantly. If you look at the Hinman emails, man, they're joking about it. They're joking about the conflict in the emails back and forth. I'll watch you pay for your own lunch. Ha, ha, ha. Right? I'm not going to buy your lunch because it might be considered bribery. Ha, ha, ha. Like, grow the fuck up, man.
Yeah, such a sad situation, and I've said it a couple of times before. Where's the integrity? And the SEC is just falling far from its core values. Um,
Yeah.
and hope, but as Tom Emmer said, hopefully a new day is coming, and that new day is soon.
Yeah, no, I hope so. I don't want to get political, and because I'm truly an independent voter, you know what I mean. I usually end up voting against the incumbent, to be honest with you, because I get tired of their lies. But I do want to see there be a I want to see hearings on this and an innovation. I wrote one line I wrote at the closing of our brief, Tony. I said, innovation has stopped at the American border.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? And that's in essence what's happened. I mean, Spin the Bits did their brief and said that he's not launching a US app because he's afraid to get in trouble with the USC. So like, how does a small entrepreneur do that? Well, I can't afford millions of dollars in attorney's fees. I'm not going to get in trouble. And that's what's happening.
And I think the other layer to that too, which even myself, I'm a bit like worried about it. We see the SEC's looking into NFTs. What are they going to do next, right? It's not like they're putting out clear guidelines. Are they going to start firing off enforcement actions? I want to launch an NFT collection, and it's going to be backed by my brand, and people will have special perks, kind of what Starbucks is doing. And but then I'm like, what's the SEC going to do? It puts a bit of fear in the air of like, okay, I don't want to.
Well, what it does is the best word is it chill. It chills innovation. It chills small businesses moving forward. And you're right. Listen, there's rumors that there's going to be a lawsuit against influencers, that a couple influencers are going to get tagged for promoting a certain token. And then the question though is what's promotion? Like, what is promotion, right?
Yeah.
If you interview someone and that person gets up and starts saying, the best token in the world is the ABC token, right? And people go out and buy it, and it was a rug pull. What all you did was interview someone. Are they going to say that is promotion? Like, what we need to do is get together. Congress has to do their job, and it probably should be a subcommittee of the CFTC, like a little digital assets division of the CFTC. Maybe put a 3 or 5 member panel together, and then they break down some clear rules of what's good, what's bad, what's lawful, what's not lawful, and so people can conduct business, because you don't want people like yourself saying, well, am I going to get in trouble if I take advantage of all my hard work and I create like this NFT collection with my brand and provide for my family? Well, are they going to say that I'm doing something bad? That's just, we can't get to the point where a guy like you is afraid to do something like that. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't be. The point is that I understand why you are. But that says a lot in and of itself.
Yeah, it's a lot of ambiguity out there, and the SEC is at the root of it. John, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much.
Thanks. I look forward to talking to you again, Tony. Say hi to your mom.